Good morning, everybody that's following us through our live stream, either YouTube or Facebook. Welcome. Welcome Priscilla, welcome Renata. Really good to see you here. And before we start, I just wanted to bring us our awareness to our FSS fraternal COVID-19 support. We do have this support that we're offering, and we are raising funds to help people in need during the COVID-19 pandemic. So if you follow us on our WhatsApp, we sent an advertisement this week, or if you go to our website, fsscalgary.ca, you can find that on the main page if you want to learn more about it. Okay, so thank you for that. And we, as usual, we start with a harmonization text just to bring us all to the same page. And we'll be reading a book from Francisco Cândido Xavier called Our Daily Bread through the Spirit Emmanuel. So the title is, or the chapter is number 61 from the book Our Daily Bread, and the title is Men and Women with Jesus. It talks about a passage from Paul to the Philippians, chapter 4, verse 4, when Paul says, "Rejoice in the Lord always. Again, I say, rejoice." With Jesus, men and women rise from the darkness to the light, from idleness to service, from ignorance to wisdom, from instinct to reason, from might to right, from selfishness to fraternity, from tyranny to compassion, from violence to understanding, from hatred to love, from deceitful possession to the search for imperishable assets. From bloody conquest to edifying self-denial. From extortion to justice. From hardness of heart to mercy. From the empty word to the creative word. From monstrosity to beauty. From vice to virtue. From disharmony to harmony, from affliction to contentment, from the swamp to the mountain, from the quagmire to glory. My brothers and sisters, let us rejoice fully in the redemptive struggle. What angelic pinnacles could we not reach if we truly consecrate ourselves to the divine friend who descended and humiliated himself for us. Beautiful text. Number 61 from Our Daily Bread. So let us pray. Closing our eyes, inviting good thoughts into our minds, we embark on a journey with Jesus. As Paul said, rejoice in Jesus. As Emmanuel as we just read. With Jesus we go from hatred to love. We go from disharmony to harmony. We go from material to creativity with Jesus. So this morning, we ask that we can open our hearts and invite Jesus in. We ask that we can build a little bit more of our internal Christ that we have within all of us. That our internal light shines a little bit brighter. In this path of self-awareness that we'll be talking about today, we would like to invite reflection. We would like to invite reason. We would like to invite the divine within us. And Jesus as our model and guide forever and ever. May we be with him, and may he guide us, and may we follow him forever and ever. So be it. So welcome everybody. Glad to see you here today. And so we'll be talking about self-awareness today. As usual, hopefully you're not tired of me talking about it, because this is number 5 of our series of self-awareness talks. And today the title is, Can Self-Awareness Dissolve Our Internal Conflicts? And again, this talk is based on the safe guidelines to develop self-awareness by our good friend Alídio Cerqueira Filho from the Federation of the State of Mato Grosso in Brazil. It's a Spiritist federation. And we're also bringing passages from the Gospel of Matthew, from John, and from the letters from Paul to the Corinthians. And heavily based on a book from João de Angelis through the medium Givaldo Pereira Franco called Seeking the Truth. So most of the text that you'll see here comes from her book. If it doesn't, I will let you know. As we're on this self-awareness journey, if you will, because it has been for me, we are on part 5. There's 6 of them, and today we'll be talking about liberation from conflicts. We've already done 1 through 4, and so far this one has actually touched me the most. So maybe we feel the same way, maybe we don't, but we'll try to reflect a little bit more on this one and stay away from the theoretical so much as some of the previous ones were. So we can then end with the existential meaning and individuation in about a month or so. We'll do that one and finalize and wrap it up. So part 5 is self-awareness and internal conflicts, and the invitation here is to reflect about freeing ourselves from internal conflicts with self-awareness. Again, Alídio, when he started compiling and making these lectures about how to free ourselves from guilt, from fear, from phobia, and how to develop our anxiety, and then how to develop self-love, how to develop self-awareness. He actually started with how to develop self-awareness. That was the first topic that he touched upon because of the importance. Because self-awareness is what we use to pave the way for a spiritual awakening, if you will, or for our own moral development. Right? It's a very important basis, because after all, it helps us get to know a little bit more about ourselves, as we'll talk about today. So, initial reflection. Inviting you to, if you want, close your eyes, and I'll pose a few questions this time. First one is, how loving am I with myself? So as we close our eyes and reflect, am I loving with myself? Or do I sometimes see myself as an enemy and fight with me? The second one is, when I sense the ego driving my feelings, my actions, how do I feel? And what do I do? So for example, if I see myself being angry, if I see myself being anxious, how do I feel about it? And what do I do with that feeling? And lastly, a little bit tougher one, am I ashamed of myself? Do I have things in myself that I don't particularly like, and do I demand them to change? Am I ashamed of those feelings that are not so enlightening, if you will? So we start all these talks, this is the 5th time, with this slide. So hopefully either know it really well, or if you're seeing it for the first time, it describes a little bit about why self-awareness, right? Why does it matter? So it starts with Jesus. No one other than Jesus. When he said in John chapter 8, he said, "You will know the truth, and the truth will set you free." Right? So the whole idea of self-awareness is helping us find that truth. Why? Well, because the truth that Jesus is talking about here is twofold. It's not just one, it's twofold. The first one is the divine truth, which we can find firstly and foremost in our conscience, right? If we can fully access it, it's all in our conscience. We can see them in the Spiritist doctrine, we can see them in the gospel of Jesus. That is the divine truth, which is our goal, if you will. And then we have the internal truth, which is us. Which is us as immortal spirits, understanding where we are today. Being honest with ourselves, trying to move away from any masks or from any personas or from any movements that we have that are not real. Move away from the pretending to be to who I truly am, right? Accepting and being honest with ourselves. That is the internal truth. So why our internal truth, right? Why is that important? Think about a map. I'm changing my analogy today. Think about a map. The divine truth is my destination, is my end goal, is where I want to be. And that's my destination on a map. But what good is a map? What good is my destination if I don't know where I am? That's where the internal truth comes in. And that's where self-awareness comes in. Right? So the divine truth, we don't learn through self-awareness. We learn through studying, through breaking the mask, being able to access our conscience. Self-awareness really plays a big role in the internal truth. It also helps with the divine truth, but the internal truth is, again, being aware of who we truly are. Because when we know where we are in a map, and we know where we want to go, we can then get there. Right? It's something very simple. But it explains the importance of self-awareness. Right? I can't change something I don't know. Oops, sorry. If I go to the hospital with a disease, the first thing that they try to do is, well, let's diagnose it. Let's know what it is so we can treat it, so we can make it better. Right? That's what self-awareness brings to us. Understanding is seeing the goods, seeing the bads, and what are we invited to change. Right? And also, it's really important too to apply the golden rule when we talk about doing to others what we wish would be done unto us. As we go through the self-awareness, as we start to look at our internal truth and where we want to go, right, the divine truth, I start to understand what I truly want done to me, if you will. Right? What do I need? What do I want that will promote my immortal spirit? So then when I know what I want that fulfills my true being, I will be much better at doing things unto others and doing other things for others, right? Because I'll be much better supplying myself what I truly need, I'll be able to help others with what they truly need. So there's many things about self-awareness, and I can talk about it for a while, so let's move on a little bit. So now we're starting with new material from part 5. And Joanna De Angelis, she brings quite a bit actually from Carl Jung, because in her books, in this psychological books, she's trying to bring the science of psychology, especially from Carl, and combining that with Spiritist doctrine and from the Gospel of Jesus and so on. So she says that Carl Jung established that humans have a bipolar structure, and actions oscillate between the two polars. She said that inexperienced people, when they realize they carry opposing sides in their internal being, they become afflicted unnecessarily. They formulate improper and punitive concepts as if the manifestations of the unconscious means inferiority, promiscuity, giving rise to unjustifiable guilt because they exist. So we'll chat a little bit about what she's trying to say here. When Carl proposes this bipolar, or these two areas of our psyche, as Joanna describes, she describes with one is the ego. Lydia sometimes refers to the ego as the shadow, and then the self, which is the light. So the self would be our immortal spirit, our conscience, if you will, our divine laws, right? Whereas the ego is the lack of understanding, is our ignorance, is all of our actions that we do that we're still not sure how to properly conduct ourselves. Our actions that are not in line with ourself. They're not in line with our conscience. So, as Joanna said, when they realize they carry opposing sides in their internal being, they become afflicted unnecessarily. So Joanna is talking about here that when we realize that we have this ego, when we realize that we have these actions that are not good, if you will, or bad inclinations, we become afflicted. But she's saying that that's unnecessary. Recognizing, again, that we have those bad inclinations is it shouldn't make us feel afflicted. On the contrary, it should help us know ourselves better so we can improve, right? That's the premises around the apprentice feeling that we constantly talk about here. And then she says that they formulate improper and punitive concepts. So when we're talking about here, if you will, it's like we have our ego trying to fight the light within us. Our conscience is there telling us to do something, and you say no. Right? And a lot of times we try to fight it so we can shut it up. And so that is what Joanna is talking about here. They formulate improper and punitive concepts as if the manifestations of the unconscious means inferiority, promiscuity. So she's saying here that when we realize we have these bad inclinations, we start to become afflicted, and we start to punish ourselves from having those bad inclinations. Right? We start to feel inferior, right? We start to have movements of promiscuity, of rebellion, giving rise to unjustifiable guilt. So it's a guilt that we feel that is not justifiable, as Joanna is saying, because we think those bad inclinations exist within us. So we feel guilty for having those, having those egotistical feelings and actions. So she's saying here that guilt is unjustifiable because we are beings in transformation, in evolution. We are here to learn, so if we make a mistake, we shouldn't, we're not invited to go through an unjustifiable guilt. Instead, we're invited to transform and improve. So, we have this idea of a clash between the two. And what we're trying to promote here is to work for unity of the ego and the self. To realize, as Joanna says, that coexistence is possible. It is possible for us to have ourself and to have our ego coexist, where they're not fighting. Instead, our conscience is helping us direct our ego. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. So, when we think about internal change, right? Since we are talking about internal conflicts, we will bring about quite a bit of internal things, if you will. Jonah says that hastily they suppose they can force change, becoming pure. However, conflicts leads them to painful discoveries of an empty existence. So, this is the idea of forcing change. So, when we see something in ourselves that we don't like, if we're trying to force that change, we are building a mask, if you will, or we are pretending to have fixed it, but we actually didn't. You can think of it as a paper pyramid, if you will. If we're trying to force a change in ourselves, right? If I am, for example, I have a lot of anger, and I force that I don't have that anger anymore. If it's not a transformation, if I'm just forcing it, if I'm just shoving it in and not letting it out, it's as if I was creating a pyramid of paper. That the minute that I touch it, the minute that something touches that paper pyramid, it collapses because it's just paper. There's nothing inside. And that's what she's talking about, painful discoveries and empty existences. So when we're in this movement of dislike with us, forcing changes upon us, we will set ourselves up for painful discoveries and empty existences. Right? Painful discovery when we find that we actually are not free from anger, and empty existences. Right? It's just like the pyramid. When you touch the paper, it collapses. There's nothing inside because we didn't build that transformation. We try to force it. So it is very empty inside. And then she says, such conflicts shouldn't be fought as enemies in the battlefield, but addressed, guided, clarified, so they can free themselves through awareness. This way, self-awareness brings about a state of feeling good by the internal achievement. So again, very powerful text that she brings us here. So she's saying that these conflicts that we have with ourselves, right, when we see something we don't particularly like, when we're forcing a change, it's like we're fighting as enemies with our own selves. We're creating a battlefield within our hearts. We're creating a battlefield within us, where you have this egotistical feeling bringing up anger, and then you're trying to fight it. You're trying to punish. You're trying to suppress it. But it is an internal feeling that we have. Right? And we're trying to deny it, we're trying to suppress it. So it becomes a battlefield within us. And that's very consuming. It consumes a lot of us. It consumes a lot of our energy. And because we stay with that battle inside, we could become a bitter person. Right? We could become bitter in the sense that when somebody else points out a mistake that we made, we immediately go fight. We're always ready to fight, right? We don't take it in, we don't accept it, and we don't try to reflect about it. No, we're in that almost constant fighting mode, if you will. And we become quite tough to deal with, right? But again, it's an internal battle that I'm just exacerbating to the outside, right? It's not the person's fault that I'm feeling angry, but it's an internal conflict that's driving me to feel that way. And then she says that what we're invited to do is to address that conflict, to guide that conflict, to clarify that conflict, so they free themselves through awareness. So again, Joanna bringing about the importance of awareness, right? Understanding what's driving it, what's causing it, and realizing that we still have that feeling within us, and we accept it, right? This way, self-awareness brings about a state of feeling good by the internal achievement. So just the fact that we are being self-aware, just the fact that we're being able to observe that bad inclination and welcome it and not try to fight it, right? Welcome it and work towards improving, that alone brings us a state of feeling good, because that alone is a huge achievement. Because we're trying to move away from the hating ourselves to the loving ourselves, right? And that alone is an amazing, it can be an amazing feeling through that self-awareness can unlock within us. Thank you, Priscilla. Yes, exactly. It is a beautiful concept of uniting them, right? We were created ignorant. We have the ego within us, and that's simply something that's driving us to improve, certainly making them work together. And we'll touch a lot more about this as well. So, as Joanna said, it's not a fight. It's not a fight. So, if it's not a fight, what is our ego? Like we said, our ego is our ignorance. And then Alirio brings this further. He goes further and says, it's a misguided feeling. Mark these words and we'll talk more about it. It's a misguided feeling. It needs some guidance, if you will. And then if you think about Jesus, what did Jesus say to those that were misguided? Did he fight them? Or did he invite them? Welcome them? He said, "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest." So when we see a feeling within us that's misguided, do we take the time to love it and to guide it? Like a lot of parents out there, they do that with their kids, right? Their kids are misguided, so they take the time to guide them. What are we doing with ourselves? Right? Do we say we just don't have time for us, and let's try to shove it, try to fight it? Or do we say, "Come to me, all who are weary and burdened, and I will guide you"? Like, let our self guide our ego. Right? So that becomes the question. What are we doing with our egoic feelings? Right? And so we are invited to welcome it. Right? Not fight it, not try to refute it, not try to pretend it doesn't exist, but to face it in a welcoming way, in a loving way. And now we'll talk a lot about it. Good morning, Anna. Good to see you here. And we will reflect together about some egoic feelings. We will talk about 3 egoic feelings, and we'll reflect together about them. And if you're willing and wanting, please share your thoughts. I'm monitoring both YouTube and Facebook. So first of all, Joanna Evangelis, if you remember, she tells us to address the egoic feeling. What is that? Addressing the egoic feeling in Portuguese, she used the word atendendo Ons sentimentos egoic. So addressing it, an egoic feeling. So for example, when we see that we're feeling anger, addressing it, it's not giving into it and embracing it in a way that you're just going to fuel it more and become angrier. It's also not trying to hide it, trying to suppress it, right? Trying to pretend it's not there. Addressing it is to see the positive intention that lies behind that feeling. Behind the anegoic feeling, there's always a positive intention that's misguided. So this was something that I had never thought about, and the leader brought it to us, and it really spoke to me. And so I will talk about it quite a bit. So this idea that there is a seed of a good intention in an egoic feeling. So addressing that feeling is trying to recognize what that seed is and then simply guide it the correct way. Right? And we do that all the time in our lives. Right? With others. Sometimes we don't do that to us, right? So, again, the ego, we can think of them as misguided feelings, right? Misguided good intentions. So now, with that in mind, we'll talk about pride, we'll talk about rebellion, and we'll talk about anxiety. And put all of those three egoic feelings in through these lenses. So, if we talk about pride, and we mean the egotistical feeling of pride, what is the good intention in pride? Trying to reinforce us as good people, right? And reinforce that I'm a good person. Reinforce that I'm a confident person, right? And those are good things, right? So pride has, and many others, but due to time, we'll stick to these two. And pride has that good intention, right? To reinforce that we're good people, to reinforce our confidence, but it's misguided, right? It's misguided because our ego, our ignorance, basically, it usually uses the external to guide us. So, because we're still unlocking our conscience, if you will, we're still trying to reach our conscience, we can't fully see it. So we're trying to learn about the divine laws and to access it, but the truth is, a lot of times we still don't apply them in our lives. So we usually utilize the external to drive a lot of our, or to guide a lot of our actions. So we have a positive intention with pride to reinforce the fact that we're good people, to reinforce our confidence, but we guide it through comparison. We guide it through trying to be better than others, right? So I'm trying to reinforce that I'm a good person by comparing myself to others. I'm trying to be confident about myself if I'm better than others, right? And that is the misguidance of the ego. So when we see that, we try to repress it. Or a lot of times, we might try to repress that feeling instead of going through this reflection that we're doing here. As soon as we feel pride, if we can detect that we're feeling pride, we're going to try and repress it. And that simply builds something called the pseudo-humility, right? Is that pseudo-humility that will actually drive us to think less of us. We will feel this encouraged, we will feel like we don't have the ability to do things, we don't have the confidence, and so on and so forth. So that pseudo-humility can be, or is very detrimental to us as well, because it works the opposite way of these positive intentions from pride. So when we're repressing an egoic feeling, it will repress both. So it will repress the comparison, but it will also repress the positive things, the positive intentions from that good feeling, right? And that's why the repressing can be so, what's the word? It can handcuff us. It's us telling us we're not capable of, right? So it can be very detrimental to us. So what are we invited to do? We're invited to take those good intentions and simply guide it the correct way. Guide it the right way. Right? The right way being guiding through the divine laws, guiding our feelings, our actions through the divine laws. So when we take that feeling of pride, if you will, those good intentions of reinforcing that I'm a good person, that I'm confident, that will generate humility. How so? It'll generate humility, which is that feeling of, yes, knowing that we're small, to the point that we don't compare ourselves to others, but also that we are grand because we're sons and daughters of God with all the potential to transform ourselves. Right? So we stop comparing with others and we start to work within. Right? And I just wanted to quickly bring up something about comparison. A lot of times we try to model ourselves after others. So being inspired by others is good, right? It's a good exercise a lot of times to help us guide our actions. But the thing with comparison is that comparison is usually driven by a feeling of jealousy, right? You're comparing yourself to others. Your self-worth is based on others, right? And that's a very disloving movement that we do with ourselves. Like, we are not good enough. So we either have to beat others to feel better, or we have to lower others to feel better. And you can see how that comparison is not healthy. Being inspired by others is a different thing. So now we'll do the same thing. We'll reflect about the feeling of rebellion. So the egoic feeling around rebellion. What is good about rebellion? What's the good intention from it? Well, rebellion wants to free ourselves from the pain. Right? When we're faced with pain, when we're faced with something that we don't want, that we don't like, we want to free ourselves from pain, which is a good intention. However, it's misguided because we're trying to free ourselves from pain through trying to avoid it, trying to numb it, trying to rip it out, or try to pretend it doesn't exist, and so on and so forth. Right? So that is the misdirection of rebellion. And when we think about what we usually do, trying to repress that rebellion, right? Like, you shall not be a rebel. Then we try to repress that feeling. What happens? It creates something that we call a pseudo-meekness. So it's a mask, basically, that we put onto our rebellion. And what is the pseudo-meekness? The pseudo-meekness is passively accepting that pain. Accepting that pain exists and not doing anything about it. Right? So again, when we repress an egoic feeling, we're repressing the misguidance. So we're repressing this idea of trying to numb it, trying to avoid it, trying to rip it out. but we're also repressing the good intention. We're repressing the good intention of trying to free us from pain. So when we develop the pseudo-meekness, meekness means mansidão in Portuguese, by the way. When we're trying to repress it, we repress it all. So we're no longer trying to numb it or avoid it, but we're also not trying to do anything to transform that pain, to improve ourselves. So we stay in this passive state of inaction. So if we take rebellion and try to guide it in a proper way, to develop meekness, again, like we talked about, it's accepting the pain, accepting that there is a lesson there, there's something that is trying to teach me, and what could I do to transform it? Not to rip it out, not trying to remove it, but transform it. So I learn what I'm supposed to learn, and the pain is no longer needed. It's no longer there. So that would be the reflection around rebellion. Let's reflect about one more. So we're doing this 3 times. So perhaps, hopefully, next time that we feel an egoic feeling coming through, we can address it, right? Address it, do this, what we're doing. And thank you, Priscilla, for your comments. Yeah, when I saw this lecture from Alito, I did what you're telling me. I took many notes, and I'll try to apply that in my life, because pride and rebellion, there's a reason why I chose those 2. Certainly one of the ones that I need to work on, and a lot of people here on Earth, we can see that as well. So thank you for your comments. And so let's talk about anxiety as well, right? Which is also another egoic feeling. And I apologize, this is in Portuguese, I forgot to change it. But in English, this is to try and anticipate facts, try to predict things that are going to happen, so we are prepared. So the good intention about anxiety is trying to be prepared for things, so things go well, right? But the thing is, we are, again, misguided by it, and what drives anxiety is that the good intention of trying to anticipate things, trying to predict things, trying to be ready for things to happen, we misguide that in a way that we're trying to control everything, right? We're trying to control not myself, but I'm trying to control others, I'm trying to control time, and that makes me feel very anxious. That makes me feel very insecure, because I simply can't, right? I can't control these things. So again, when I'm feeling anxious, and I try to repress it, that develops a pseudo-serenity, which represses the idea to try and control, but it also represses the idea of trying to be ready for things, right? Which is something fairly active. So again, the pseudo-serenity leaves us in a very passive state, right? It's that feeling of I can't control anything, so I bother. Like why do anything really? I can just sit and do nothing, because there's no point in trying to do anything. And it also brings us a comment: it doesn't mean I have to go through rebellion to learn, but to take the good intention behind our egoistic feelings. Exactly. If that good intention is being guided, that is the ego working with the self and not directing it. So, like Anna said, we don't have to go through rebellion to learn, because if we're able to guide that good intention, it doesn't become rebellion, it becomes meekness. And again, bringing us back to anxiety, apologize. So, if we're trying to overcome or to guide our anxiety, that will bring us serenity, right? Serenity realizing the things that we can control and work on those, and understanding that as immortal spirits, as apprentices of life, as sons and daughters of God, we have all we need to overcome whatever is thrown at us. And also understanding that if we can't, God's mercy is always there. God loves us no matter what. If we succeed or if we fail in a task, He already loves us, regardless of the result. Right? So understanding that we have the tools to succeed, and if we don't, with our responsibility, we can try again. Right? So bringing us a serenity, again, guiding properly that feeling. And so those are all the reflections about the egotistical feelings. And I really liked that lecture from Lydia, and thank you for the comments. It's something that I also took a lot of notes. And now we'll move on to another few things that was in that book from Jean Evangelist, and that talks about internal conflict as well. So she brings us an idea or something that can happen to us, and she says they're unfortunate thoughts. So I'm changing a little bit of topics here now. So she says that it's a common occurrence to have unfortunate thoughts during prayer, during meditation, which are not so common in other occasions, generating restlessness and unease. So what is she talking about here? Right? Sometimes when we're meditating, sometimes when we're praying, Alida even says sometimes when we're in the spiritual center, we're doing passes, we're in preparing for a mediumistic meeting. Sometimes we have feelings or thoughts that come to mind, and sometimes images of things that are not very good, if you will. They're unfortunate thoughts, right? For example, vices like vices such as food, such as sex and things like that come to our minds. So she calls those unfortunate thoughts. And the question here is, what do we do with them? Right? If we are, let me step back. Why do we have them? Alida says that it's because we are in that peaceful state of a prayer, of a meditation, and so on, that these thoughts, they are within us already, right? We haven't overcome them. We just repress them, we just shove them in the basement, if you will. And then when we're peaceful, some of them might come up running, right? Look at me, I'm here. Do something with me. So this is a reflection. When we do have those thoughts, when we are meditating, praying, here at the center, and so on and so forth, when we have them, are we repressing them? Are we pushing them back to the basement? Or are we addressing them? Are we thinking positive? Are we understanding why they're coming, and then accepting them, and through that welcoming them, and then dissolving them? Right? We're not going to try to, you're not going to try to resolve it in that circumstances, but you can certainly welcome it, accept it, right? Understand they make who you are, right? Who we are, and be able to see what they're trying to do. They're basically calling our attention to address them and not shove them in. And in Matthew, Jesus said, "Settle matters quickly with your adversaries." So one of the interpretations here is that because we're suppressing a lot of our ego, we're suppressing a lot of our thoughts, we see them as adversaries. We see them as an obstacle from us being better people. So we see them, again, enemies. So Jesus was inviting us here to settle our matters quickly. Settle it. Not try to shove it. Not try to repress it. Not try to suppress it. But to settle. To address it. Right? It's moving away from the fight and uniting them, coexisting with our egoic feelings, accepting them and working to transform them. The coexistence is possible, absolutely. And then Joanna brings out also the illusion of the repression. And all these things that we're talking about, they are the things that generate these internal conflicts. So she says that many times it may seem the individual, through great effort, was able to achieve the integration until the moment that they're surprised with the terror of an unexpected separation, which takes them to a profound torment. So, here what we're talking about is sometimes we think we have developed that virtue, but then something unexpected happened, and I fall into a profound torment, if you will. And then it makes me realize that I perhaps hadn't developed that virtue yet, most likely because I was still trying to repress the egoic feeling and not transform it, right? She says, especially if they lived for an ideal purpose that choked the conflict, but they didn't solve it. This ultimately brings the feeling of uselessness and existential emptiness. Right? So, virtues are not developed through repression, they're not developed through imposition, they're developed through gradually working with them, right? Guiding our good intentions. And when she says here, especially if they lived for an ideal purpose that choked the conflict. So it's when we stay in the intellectual, when we have all the knowledge, right? We try to live by that ideal, but when it comes time to actually transforming ourselves, we choke the conflict, if you will. We don't want to deal with ourselves, and we live by that ideal. Repressing any feeling that we have that doesn't abide by the ideal, and then eventually something hits us, and then we're faced with finding who we truly are. Which when we find ourselves in this profound torment, that's when we realize sometimes it brings us feelings of uselessness and existential emptiness, because we realized we were living by an ideal that I hadn't reached. I thought I was, but I thought it was something that I'm not really. And again, this is the invitation with self-awareness, right? So, talking about ideals, Joanna also brought more information. She said, many individuals take refuge in ideals, especially in religious doctrines, such as evasion from reality, adopting noble behaviors, however, only masking their conflicts, as for example, when adopting violent organic conducts, especially revolving around sexuality. So again, it's living by the idealistic and not working within ourselves to get there, but repressing the feelings that we have. And I am running out of time a little bit, so I'm going to run through. There's a couple more slides. And this is what Paul told us in the first letter to the Corinthians in chapter 6. He said, I have the right to do anything, you say, but not everything is beneficial. And that's one of the beauties of the Spiritist doctrine, right? The Spiritist doctrine doesn't tell us that it doesn't prohibits us from anything. It tries to bring our conscience about. It tries to help us reach our conscience, so we, as rational beings, as beings that can think, that can feel, be able to, within us, decide whether something should be done or shouldn't be done. Right? Like Paul said, I have the right to do anything that I want, but not everything is beneficial. Right? And with accessing my conscience, I can understand whether or not that's beneficial. Eventually, certainly, we'll be able to. And then, so I wanted to bring, this slide is quite long, and it's a beautiful text that Joanna brings about talking about Spiritism, and I will go a few minutes over, I apologize. So she says in this text, still in the same book, about Spiritism, she says that a rational religion like Spiritism, devoid of formulas that hide its content, which is optimistic and not castrating, which invites the individual to take on difficulties. So she says that Spiritism is a clear doctrine, right? And I liked how she said a rational religion like Spiritism. So she's not excluding or making Spiritism the one and that everybody should follow it, but she's pointing out the good things about Spiritism. Devoid of formulas that hides its content. So Spiritism doesn't have formulas or dogmas or things that have to be imposed because we're able to explain everything. We don't have to hide anything, or the Spiritist doctrine doesn't have to hide anything, right? And it's always optimistic, and it's not castrating, right? It's not castrating us from anything. It doesn't prohibit us from doing anything. On the contrary, it actually invites us to take on our difficulties, right? It makes us realize that we have the responsibilities, but we also have all the strength that we need, all the tools that we need to take on our difficulties and improve through them, working them naturally. So this speaks a lot to what Jesus tells us in Matthew 11, right? My yoke is easy and my burden is light. Working them naturally. It doesn't become a hard work. It doesn't become a heavy work, but it becomes a natural work. Without the concern of looking like what they still do and don't achieve. So without concerning ourselves about showing our bad inclinations as well. Right? A lot of times we're driven just to show the good parts of us and hide the parts that are not good. She's saying here that Spiritism is not concerned about hiding the things that are not good about us. Right? We're a whole. Right? We're a whole person. Right? It's our ego and our self working together. There's no separation. There's no trying to hide a part of ourselves and showing the others. Right? We're a whole. Structure in the reality of the immortal spirit with its glories and limitations. Again, right? Understanding we're mortal beings, that we have already worked on a few things, and we are glorified in them, but there are also a lot of things, a lot of our limitations that we still are here to learn and to work with. And then, this is beautiful too, it says it's a valuable therapeutic resource for the union of all opposites, which will merge, giving way to the self freed from conflict. So it's a doctrine that brings us the therapy about ourselves, unionizing all the opponents, right? Bringing us together, our ego, ourselves, together as one, merging into something that will free ourselves from conflicts. Because when we are united, when our ego and ourself is united, we no longer have conflicts, internal conflicts anymore, right? Which can be united to the divine, without the devices that aim to superficially please others and their superfluous existential behaviors. Right? So no, I'm not doing things to superficially fulfill myself or superficially fulfill others, but I'm working to unite myself with my ego and work towards improving my ego and uniting that with my with the divine, right? My divine essence and the divine. And I'll have 2 more slides, I believe. So, self-awareness can transform. That's the whole reason why we're talking about self-awareness and internal conflicts. Joanna said that every present moment is great in the life of the conscious man. And everything that he proposes to accomplish, instead of becoming a challenge, it's an incentive for him to proceed smoothly with the interior illumination. So, it's a mouthful. So, what she's saying here is that when we're self-aware, right, the man that is working towards that conscious path. It sees everything that we go through as an opportunity to learn. Right? It's no longer something that's preventing us from evolving, but it's something that will help us evolve. So we see everything as an opportunity instead of a burden. Now, the ego here is still present. We're not talking about pure spirits. We're not talking about Jesus here. We're talking about something that we can achieve if we work for it. The ego here is still present. Accepting the ego with responsibility leads to spiritual health. And that means that there are no longer internal conflicts. Because internal conflicts, they come from that demand of perfection. So when we can unite the ego and the self, right? When we accept our ego and let our conquest to learn more about the divine laws, to transform our egos, right? Doing the work that we should do, or that we're invited to do every day, right? To bring the divine laws and use them to guide our ego, to guide our positive intentions, right? That will free ourselves from internal conflicts, right? It doesn't mean that we don't have the ego. It doesn't mean that we're perfect. It doesn't mean that we're pure spirits. No. We still have the ego. We're still working to transform it. But the internal conflicts can dissolve. And the last one is the eternal light that Joanna beautifully brings to us. She says that we are Lucidianites. This is a word that she created in Portuguese, so there is no real translation, but it basically means that we are created from light. We're created by the light. As in the Genesis, it's told to us that we are made the image and similitude of God. So we are created by light, and as the question 115 of the Spirit's book says, we are created to be happy, to work towards our happiness. So we are created for mental lucidity. We're created by the light, and we're created to mental lucidity. This brings us the idea that yes, we can get there. Right? Happiness is achieved. The union between the self and the ego is achievable. And the transformation of all our ego is also achievable. Why? In other words, we will reach the light. The shadow is transitory. Everything will pass, except one thing. The light, which will always be eternal. So thank you for listening to our talk here. Thank you for the interactions. Thank you for the comments. Really appreciate it. Priscilla, Anna, Renata, really good to have you here today. And again, this will be available on Facebook and YouTube. And you can also, I invite you to listen to the talks from Alido Tsekera Filho about this. Right? It's the SAFE guidelines on developed self-awareness. And this talk was based on lectures 9 and 10, if you're looking for them. 9 is the one that really spoke to me. So if you wanna look up, I recommend it. So if there are no other questions, I don't think there is. So again, thank you for being here with us, and we'll end with a prayer then, and hopefully with a lot of food for thought. So let us close our minds. Sorry. Let's close our eyes and open our minds. Open our heart. And feel that invitation from Jesus. Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you light. And we ask Jesus, the one who said those words, to help us say those words to ourselves. Any part that we do not like about us, Jesus, help us think. Help us say, invite it, welcome it into us, as part of us. And understanding that we have all the potential and that we have all the time and the strength to transform it. But it starts with the welcome. It starts with extending the hand like Jesus did and saying, come to me, all you who are weary. So when we have those egoic feelings, when we have that rebellion, that pride, we welcome it. And we work towards guiding it, like Jesus guided so many and still does. Dear God, thank you again for allowing us to have all this material, to allow us to have the technology to be able to broadcast this, and for giving us our conscience, our divine laws, giving us the tools that we have to work on this beautiful thing, this beautiful creation of God that is us. Thank you, Lord, for being with us here today. And may we go in peace and reflect and develop our self-awareness for a better being. So be it. Thank you very much, you all, and we invite you to come to our online meeting tomorrow in Portuguese at 7 p.m. So thank you again, and hope you have a great Sunday and a great rest of your weekend. See you later.